Welcome back to Twin Times Podcast, episode 30. Today we have a special guest. We haven't done one in a while. His name is Hashem McAdam. He is a freelance photographer from Melbourne. We talk about his work within the photography space and his YouTube channel called Pushingfilm, where they talk about film photography and making a community around that. Other than that, let's hop into the episode. All good. How are you, mate?
Yeah, good, man. Thanks for queuing this up, and sorry it took me a while to figure out a date for it.
That's all right. We've all got busy lives, mate. We've just come back from Sydney ourselves, so we've all been a bit busy.
Nice. What were you doing there?
We're over there for a concert, so we went to see Coldplay over the weekend, which was good.
I was going to guess actually, was it Coldplay?
All right, so if you could tell us a little bit about yourself, Hashem, and what made you want to get into photography?
Well, thanks again for having me on, first of all. I never love talking about myself, but I
Okay.
appreciate doing this because I'm usually the one on the other side. But yeah, I'm a freelance photographer and somewhat of a videographer as well. And through that, I got into YouTube, and I'm based here in Melbourne, although I was originally from Perth, which is why, as you know, I had to postpone this chat because I just went on a trip back
Mm.
to Perth. But yeah, I believe we met. You messaged me on Instagram, was it? And you found me
Yeah,
through the YouTube
no,
channel.
yeah. So what happened was, it was random, really. I was really getting into the photography and just having YouTube like recommendations come up, and then this community came up about pushing film or this YouTube channel. And it was around a community pushing film photography, and
Hmm.
then watched the video in its full entirety, and I really liked that sense of community that you brought. And I don't know if those continue. We'll talk about it later on in the chat today. But it was something that really compelled to me, and I thought, well, this is someone we could potentially talk to about not only this, but potentially his work. You said you're a photographer, so I had a look at your work. It's really quite stunning and really beautiful. And I thought, well, we'll get this bloke on. So
No, thanks for saying that. Yeah, so in a nutshell, I'm just a photography nerd. I'm not. I don't
mm,
fancy myself as someone with stunning work necessarily, but yeah, it's nice to hear you say that, and that you enjoyed the community stuff because that's something I've been getting into more lately.
yeah, beautiful, mate. Your photography work spans across like all certain types of styles and genres, I guess, between love, commercial, and your own personal projects such as street photography. I did see a video about that recently. I'm gonna go give that a watch. But what do you feel you're more best and suited at?
My favorite genre of photography would probably be the documentary stuff I do. So that would include
Mm,
street, and then to some degree, there is a bit of a documentary and reportage element when I'm shooting events and weddings, which is probably why I
mm.
started to choose those as my way of trying to make a bit of money through photography. But yeah, I most enjoy just being out in the world on the streets, documenting, candid life moments as they happen.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah, it definitely comes across in your work for sure. Absolutely. So when taking these incredible images and photos, do you have an idea in mind of when you're taking these shots, or do you leave some room for some creative freedom, I guess?
I usually don't have much of an idea in mind. I might have a loose theme or a target, especially if it's like, let's say I'm going out and there's a certain event on, then I might have something that's shaping what I'm looking for. But I usually let the world itself inform what I'm actually photographing. And that is
Nice.
part of the fun of it, is the surprise. Like just being out there, you could be out for an hour and nothing happens. You're walking the street, but then all of a sudden there's an interaction or some really nice light hitting a building. Could be really simple. So I try not to come in with too much of a preconception.
See that through your work and doing my research, you've been around the world quite a bit, doing a lot of photography work. Where's your favorite destination that you've shot in, or if you have one?
Uh, it's hard to pick one. I've traveled to maybe, between 5 and 10 countries, so I'm not too well traveled, but I'm really lucky to have done even what I have. And my favorite places are generally the ones that are quite different to here. I was born in Australia, and you kind of get used to our culture and way of
Yeah.
living. So the my favorite place is the place that give you a culture shock. So places that are really different. So for example, Bangladesh or Nepal, or
Mm.
being out in some rural part of Japan, even where just things and the lifestyle and and the landscape is just completely different. Although I don't have a single favorite place necessarily, it kind of depends on the genre of photography. But yeah, it's generally those kinds of countries. So if I go to Europe and I go to like, Italy, yeah, it's fun, it's beautiful, but I don't, funny enough, enjoy it as much as somewhere like Dhaka, Bangladesh, where it's just chaotic and everything's so
Yeah.
different. And especially if there's a language barrier, there's a bit of curiosity and feeling like you're in the flow when you're in somewhere like that.
Yeah, for sure. I watched that video you sent me via email, and it seemed very chaotic. That sort of not only around that event at that time in Bangladesh. So, how did that image come about? If we can talk a little bit about that image.
Oh, so that was the one I with the boat, right? People getting off the ship.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so we were on a sort of a cruise, basically. They call it a launch there for whatever reason, which is those big cruise ships. And they traveled down the river to different. We were in the capital city of Dhaka. But yeah, we caught our smaller cruise ship, got off at a town called Chandpur, and then we caught like a boat, like just a, you know, little motorboat, five of us,
Yeah.
got off at this beach that we were meaning to check out. It's called they call it Mini Cox's Bazaar, but it's like, has other names as well. It's like a little river beach, I guess. And there's just people hanging out. And,
Mm.
I don't know, like most of them, they're just there to chill and take photos and play soccer and whatever. So then we saw this other massive cruise ship approaching where you wouldn't normally expect it. Like here you have the Spirit of Tasmania or whatever, and they only dock at a marina. Whereas this was like a
Yeah.
sandy beach, basically, and this thing was getting
Yes.
closer and closer. And I thought, what is it planning to actually dock here? Like, what's going on? And it's a beautiful, massive ship with like these ornate decorations and hundreds of people out on I don't know the ship terminology, but they're kind of like on the
Yeah.
balconies of the front of the ship. And and I'm already my photographer spidey sense is switching on. I'm like getting ready and just watching this thing, and I'm going, hey, is that? And then it gets closer and closer. Turns out they are going to dock, but not. They don't want to get beached, obviously. So it's kind of letting some passengers off, maybe 30 meters away from the shore. And these guys looks like they're experienced. And there's a guy getting off and like using a stick to check the depth. And they get as close as they can, rotate the ship in a certain way, and all these people start getting off the ship. And I can't remember, they're using like a little bit of a ramp that someone had set up, but they still have to walk and wade through a bit of water. So it's just a fun, interactive kind of thing to witness, even if I wasn't there to be taking photos, because you'd never see something like that here. It was a bit of a spectacle. So that's really, it was just a spur of the moment thing. And then I had my camera ready and I started like walking a little bit towards the shore and watching and trying to build a frame. So although I don't, like I
Mm.
said, have a preconception, I build it around what happens. So I'm like, all right, you know what? I want to get the foreground of people coming off the ship, and I want to get the ship in the midground and the background showing that it's just a big empty beach, you're not at a marina. And then I just started to wait for it all to happen. And the shot that I sent you, for example, was one
Yeah.
of maybe I took 20 during that session. Two guys getting off, and not all of them want to get their shoes wet or have to take their shoes off. So just one guy was carrying the other, and it's just two teenagers, and they're
Yeah.
all having a laugh and having fun. And yeah, I just snapped it at the right time. I had to kind of predict, hey, this is going to happen, and I want to time it and then get as much in the frame as I can. Because when I'm shooting in that style, I want to fill the frame. I've said to people, I love those old comic books like Asterix or Tintin, where there's like a big wide frame
Yeah.
and all there's a story
Yeah.
within there and different characters. And every time you look at it, you might find something interesting. And yeah, I was just really lucky, just being at the right place, right time is often the biggest like reward when you're out on the street. You sometimes get nothing, but then you eventually get lucky if you're out there, for enough time.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's like that little sparkle of madness that can just
Yeah,
come about, and then you go,
absolutely.
right, I've got to go ahead and take it.
yeah.
Did the culture really impact you in Bangladesh?
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, I mean, it has to in a way, doesn't it? Because especially when it's
Mm.
so different. And I went there having some connections, so it helps a little bit. But I'm still completely foreign. I didn't know much of the language. I just tried to learn little bits and pieces, but for the most part, couldn't really interact.
Mm.
But yeah, it's amazing. People are so friendly there. I've been to other countries and like big European cities or whatever where people aren't as curious because they're just kind of like, ah, bloody tourists, or they're just
Yeah.
don't care because it's just ordinary to see whatever kind of people. But over there, people are so curious and friendly, and they, especially if you don't look like you're from the country, they'll want to ask you why you're there or what you like about their country,
Yeah,
or ask you about your country, and they're just super friendly. And then the food and the sights and the colors, it's beautiful there. You know, the unfortunate part is maybe a lot of this is due to the pollution in the atmosphere, but the light is often really nice because in winter you have a bit of a
yeah,
hazy sky, and then the light shines through it, and
mm,
it creates this really dreamy look. You wouldn't have noticed it so much in that photo, but in the big city, for example, there is. So as a photographer, you can't help but like appreciate those things, like the light and the colors people wear. You know, it's completely different to what we
mm,
have here.
yeah,
Yeah. So
yeah,
the culture is massive. It's definitely a beautiful culture.
yeah. Beautiful, mate. What are your thoughts about film photography sort of coming back into focus? It's been like sort of a trend coming about of late in probably the last year or so.
It has.
Why do you think it, yeah, why do you think it is coming back? I noticed in Sydney quite a bit. There was quite a few film photography cameras around. So I was just like, oh, I wonder why this is coming back into focus. So what's your thoughts on it?
Hmm. Is that just while you're walking around the street, you see people carrying
Yeah,
film
yeah,
cameras? Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Well, this has been probably 10 years that it's been like growing, I think. I don't know if it ever
Mm,
really died off. Obviously, it didn't. There were people who were always into it. But when I started shooting film again, because it was the main way I got into photography as a teenager. I was a teenager in
mm,
the late 90s. So when I went to uni, digital was taking over and film was kind of mostly forgotten. But then I noticed when I moved to Melbourne around 2008, you know, it was really coming back and people were starting to appreciate these old cameras. And I think once digital was given enough time to become mainstream, that was the problem. People started to get bored of that and people wanted something different. And film is more unpredictable, it's more tangible. You have that, the fact that you have to wait for the images. And especially
yeah,
nowadays, there's been another surge, especially of younger crowd that are probably in their teens now. And for them, we live in a world of this instant gratification. Everything's just so carbon copy and instant and all that. So
mm,
shooting film is just something that they enjoy, like, and they're willing to pay money for because they get that satisfaction out of it that you can't quite get with digital. You can try and replicate it. You know, there are some digital cameras that hide the screen or they don't even have one, or you can make yourself wait or put a small memory card, which is fine. But yeah, I just think it's because people are starving for that unpredictability and having to wait a little bit
yeah.
and not having instant gratification.
You get a sense of rawness from the image
Yeah,
as well, which
yeah. Do you
Yeah.
do you think it gives you a sense of rawness when shooting on film photography rather than digital?
Yeah, yeah, I think that's a big part of it. When I've chatted to people, you know, I ask the same question because, as you know, I do a few interviews here and there, and I try and like study this question myself. And I think the rawness is part of it because digital, in my opinion, can be too perfect. So between one digital
mm,
camera and another, they'll mostly have an overlapping look and feel to them, unless maybe you go back, like this is why also people go back and use old digital cameras from, let's say, 15, 20 years ago. Then you might start to feel like it's retro. And younger people are doing that too, which to me proves that they want that imperfection. So if that is what you're kind of referring to as rawness, I think that it is part of it.
Mm.
They like the grainy, gritty look of it. The photo just feels like a memory. It doesn't feel like a
yeah,
perfect representation of what just happened. So a lot of the time, I speak to lab owners and they're having this younger demographic coming in with disposable cameras. So these are like film cameras, but they're not even producing a very sharp image from within the capability of the film camera world. You can get film cameras 35 mil that can produce a beautiful, stunning image that looks very sharp and clean, almost like digital, if you use the right film, the right lens. But
mm,
no, they actually like that what's being called a low-fi look, low fidelity. So that is definitely a huge part of it. They love it. You know, it's just Instagrammable and whatever. They don't even care about the negatives or the
yeah,
Yeah.
grids. So I definitely think that's a big part of it.
yeah, for sure, man. Do you think there's a certain craftsmanship when it comes to film photography, especially when you're printing your images?
Yes, although I wouldn't say that this is exclusive to film. I wouldn't, you know, I love
Mm,
film myself and I kind of have a bias to think that there is more of a sense of craftsmanship, but not really. Like, I think with digital, you can, if you are intentional enough, put a lot of craftsmanship into the editing, into the printing. You still have that capability, but innately, film does have more of it, I think. Like, it just lends itself to more craftsmanship because you have to develop the film, especially if you're doing it yourself. You're not sending it to a lab.
Mm,
Every step of the process can affect the final image. And then
Yeah.
you're more inclined to want to print it or to go beyond and think about your settings and all that because you're not getting that instant feedback. So although you can have just as much craftsmanship with digital, I think film naturally has more.
yeah. Do you have a lab yourself where you do your film photography?
Not a lab, I just do it at home. So with
Okay, yeah,
developing
cool.
film, you can just use like a dark bag, like just a black bag in a little tank, and you can kind of just do it in the laundry or bathroom or whatever. And then with printing, if you want to print optically, so using an enlarger, you would need a completely dark space. So usually I would just maybe turn the laundry dark and then have the red light. But I've never like had an actual professional dark room, like a dedicated one or a
Mm,
lab or anything like that. I'm lucky enough to live in Melbourne where we have a lot of great labs. We have community dark
mm,
rooms. I've gone and visited, through the channel, gotten to know people who've built labs or work at them. And I've even before, worked at a camera store that had a lab upstairs. It was one of the biggest in the country before they shut down. And I was at the customer facing end of the imaging department, which is taking orders for the lab, prints, helping people with
yeah.
their film and cameras. So
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah, beauty. Do you feel it's important to print your photos nowadays?
Yeah, I think so because at least in my experience and people I've spoken to, digital data, the longer you leave it, either the harder it is to access it, to dig it up, or it gets lost. You
Yeah.
know, when I think back, I've got stuff from uni, like, or stuff from 10 plus years ago. It's often on a hard drive that I'd have to dig up, or I've lost it. It was
Mm,
maybe on some DVD spindle that I lost,
Mhm.
my uni projects, and it's really unfortunate, or like some of the photography I did. But the stuff that you print, it occupies your physical space. So even if it's not for the sake of archiving, I think if photography is occupying your physical space, like, whatever, I have photos on the background there that you can see, it's just always there. It's present and it's reaching its final form. It's kind of like an
yeah.
anime type analogy. A photo doesn't reach its final form, I think, until you display it somehow or print it because digital information can be lost so easily. Or it's just imagine, like you grow older and you have a family and it's like 30 years down the track and you want to show your kids or something. And you're trying to dig up
Mm,
some iPad that doesn't even have a charger anymore. And then it's just that barrier. But if you have an album, like even just a little photo album with 6x4s, like the way I interact with photos from my childhood, it's just there. And even though, sure, that can get lost or burned down or whatever, it's just different. It's tangible. You can pick it up and look at it, and the light shines on the print and interacts with it. So I think it's really important.
yeah, absolutely. That collection in the background is a bit faded out, well, from what we can see, but it probably looks really, really good. Do you want
Mhm.
to talk about some of those photos?
Well, what I've got there actually, so I've got a metallic board, and that's kind of just like a pegboard for whatever I'm currently working on or stuff that I want
Yeah.
in my consciousness, kind of just to remind me, hey, this is part of a series or just random shots really that I've maybe done some test prints for. So they're not meant to be a display that is like, hey, this is a great collection of work or anything. But I'll often use that magnet board, kind of like someone might use a whiteboard or Instagram even, just to kind of have what they're working on and look at it and shift them around and see how they look next to each other. So I'm currently working on putting some of those photos, including the black and white stuff that we were talking about from Bangladesh, into a book of some kind. So I will use something like that to organize them and put my favorites up there. Because what happens is sometimes they'll marinate for a couple of months and you go, no, you know what? I don't like this one as much as I thought I did. I'll shift something else in there, or you gain appreciation for it. You go, wow, this is actually better than I thought it was, because it's just always
Yeah.
there, and then it has time to like to brew, so to speak. But then yeah, some stuff in the frames there, it's just like nice photos that I liked and that maybe look good in the space, and I decided to print and frame. But now it kind of looks a bit messy. It's part of the reason why I have it a bit blurred. I'm using my SLR, so actually excuse me if the camera gives out at any point. I try and mix and match between using a webcam and if my studio is really messy, I kind of want to hide it. Yeah,
That's
yeah.
all right, mate. We're just recording our front office. There you
No,
go.
fair enough.
Yeah, whatever works at the end of the day. Do you believe film photography is important to society? Do you believe it needs to
Mm.
keep happening for years to come?
You know what? As long as photography keeps happening for years to come,
Mm.
I'm happy enough with that because I think it's a beautiful art form. And even now with AI coming in and people are kind of taking that up, not to say that that's not, valid in its own way or that it's too lazy or anything like that. I just think being in full control and photographing the world as it is without any modification is a really valuable art form that shouldn't be lost. And for me, yeah, I think, film, it would be great for it to stay as long as possible. I know it gets prohibitive as time goes on and things get more expensive and certain chemicals become banned or environmentally unsafe. Um, but I'm optimistic. I would like to think that film is important enough for us to retain it for as long as possible.
Yeah, for sure, man. For sure. I'd love to see it keep happening for another 5, 10 years.
Yes.
See if my kids want to end up doing it. You never know.
Yeah,
You
I'm
never
I'm
know.
hoping for 50. I'm hoping for like, the rest of
Yeah,
the
that's
kids.
right, mate. That's right. Tell us a little bit about your YouTube channel, Pushing Film. Like I was very encapsulated by it when I first watched that first video. I'm glad YouTube recommended it to me because it led to this. So um
Remind me which
when
one was the first one you watched?
it was a Melbourne night photography video.
Ah, yeah, the meetup.
With it.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. But if you just want to tell us in general what Pushing Film and that YouTube channel is about, be great.
Yeah. Well, it started in 2016. I was working, it's just a retail job in Melbourne, but I always had the photography as my kind of hobby, my side gig. I was starting to get into it more. And I used to watch YouTube. I used to go on there and like even from 2012 onwards, when YouTube was really starting to take off and people would turn to it for any informative videos. What camera should I buy? Like, how do I do this or
Yeah.
that? So I started to really enjoy what I was seeing, and I was starting to get into film again for the same reasons that I explained earlier. I was kind of getting a bit bored with digital, and I enjoyed this like return to film myself. And I was watching YouTubers from America, Matt Day and Ted Forbes and like John Free and whatnot. And I had a friend that I would chat to that I was starting to develop this friendship with my friend Nick from back then. He worked downstairs and he was getting into film as well. So we would go down and have coffee. He worked at a cafe downstairs. We would just chat about film and we would talk about these YouTubers. Hey, did you watch the latest Matt Day video? He showed how to develop film. It was kind of like
Mm.
really unique back then. And then eventually we got to a point where we said like, hey, we should start one. There's nothing in Australia. We don't like, it'd be good to have something here, especially with the focus on community about like what's a good local lab? How do I get something printed? Whatever, just we just had a curiosity with no expectation. So we in late 2016 just decided let's do a video. We battled the idea back and forth because we're both quite introverted, we're not like really
Mm.
boisterous personalities or anything. So we even argued over like, well, I don't want to be on camera. I'll shoot, you can talk. And he was, oh no, I don't want to do it. Like so we just agreed, fine, let's just both talk. So it's awkward for both of us. And we had no expectations for it to grow. We just wanted to like put it out there, maybe network a little bit, get to know people. And just one thing led to another. And I was working at the camera store, and I eventually had people coming in with certain issues that I recognized were common problems, like younger shooters not knowing how to load film into a camera. And I would help them out on a daily basis. And I thought, why don't I just make a video about this? This was probably a year later. And we do
Mm.
videos like, or tips, how to get a broken camera and test if maybe it's an easy fix. Maybe you just need a battery or the lens isn't on properly or whatever it may be.
Yeah.
And then I really started to enjoy, although my friend was still quite busy with the cafe, I was really starting to enjoy this whole YouTube thing and the feedback that I would get because I felt it when I was working in the store. It feels good to help someone out with something. So
Yeah,
if
for
I can
sure.
do that on the internet with a much broader reach, it was double the satisfaction of feeling like, oh, cool, this is helping someone. This is kind of what I got out of those YouTubers that I watched. And then eventually it got to the point where people in the store would be like, hey, I think I saw you on YouTube. Or I would just recommend them, like, oh, you know what? I can't explain it in full, but here's a link to a video that shows how to do it or whatever. Yeah, so it just snowballed. It just snowballed. We had no expectation. I think that's the best way to start something. I can sense that with you guys
Yeah.
for the podcast. It's not like you kind of, some people are chasing clout or they just want to get numbers or they
Mm.
go with some kind of formulaic approach. We had a really rough, raw, bad equipment, no good microphone. Now I've gotten to the point where I have a bit of an experience
Set
to
up.
yeah, yeah. But no, really, it started just kind of spur of the moment.
Yeah, well, that's how I like to do things. I like to interview the people that are interesting to me and I take an interest in their work, which is great. When did you start getting recognition?
Well, the earliest forms were probably what I was just mentioning about being in the store,
Mm,
but then I guess it kind of made sense because I'm in Melbourne and I'm working at a camera store, so I'm much more likely to have film photographers come in and see like, hey,
yeah,
weren't you on a video? So that was about a year or
yeah.
two in, and that video that I made showing people how to load film, I really just made it because I was already doing that in person and finding that there were so many because I had a background with film cameras at least. I kind of had a very mechanical understanding even from beyond that. I'm always been mechanically minded. But then I realized that not everyone has that experience, especially if they're from a younger generation and they didn't. And I just wanted to help people. So I think having done that while working in a camera store, obviously I was starting to then interact with some of the same people that were watching the videos. Maybe YouTube was initially showing my videos to Aussies, and then they were Melbourne is a pretty big hub for like film and
Yeah,
whatnot.
yeah.
So that was the earliest form, but then later on it got to a point where I would be walking the street and someone would be like, "Hey, are you the guy from so and so?" And I'll be like kind of struck by it because again, I've always been quite introverted and I don't like
Yeah.
being the center of attention. If anything, I've gotten to this point where I'm able to chat to you guys comfortably over time through doing this. I wasn't naturally like this.
Mm,
So that was a bit confronting, to be honest. But I would always feel really cool about it after. I'm like, wow, that's amazing. I just can't believe it. And it was never what it was all about, but it was like a nice bonus that I still appreciate to this day. Like I'm sometimes overseas and someone will might recognize, hey, weren't you on some video? And then I use that as a way to connect with them because I might have been too shy to be like, hey, are you what
mm.
film camera are you shooting? And then they'll come up to me,
Mm.
and now it's easier and it's helped me, just come up to someone and be like, hey, you shooting film?
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, you're a very approachable guy. Yeah, for sure.
Oh,
You
thanks.
definitely
I hope so.
get.
Because that's not what I used to get to at uni. I'd be told like,
Mm.
oh, like I thought you were really serious and whatever, because maybe it's just my resting face or whatever. But no, behind that, I'm
Uh,
actually I'm not overly serious or anything.
Nah, beautiful, mate. Beautiful.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you believe that these social media platforms like Instagram and YouTube have helped you to able to collaborate with like-minded people?
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah. Like even just this wouldn't have happened, I guess, if it wasn't for the
Yeah,
YouTube channel.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and from very early on, that was a big element of it. If you watch the first video we ever made back in late 2016, we did an introductory video like, hey, we're Nick and Hashem, and we wanted to make a channel to talk about film and printing and community. As we said, we wanted to
Mm.
do interviews because we thought it was a way to bridge that common interest between people. And we did an interview with a guy named Eric Kim that same year, one of our earliest videos. And he was someone we were a fan of. We watch him on YouTube. And then he was visiting and doing a workshop, and we used that as a way to connect and be like, hey, do you want to do an interview? Just like this. Although we filmed it on a crappy GoPro with the built-in mic and it was echoing in the cafe. It was terrible
Yeah.
Yeah.
quality. It was still really fun for us. And that's always been a big part of it, that we wanted to eventually do meetups. That was one of our aims, is to do workshops and meetups. And we actually did some really early kind of stuff. And then, it got tricky by the time it was lockdowns and here in Melbourne. It kind of took the back seat. But that's why it's been coming back since then, because I realized, you know what, I want to put focus back into that. And then it led to the video that you watched, which was the
Yeah.
night meetup. The first time I had someone record a meetup and shared it online in any major way. I think I might have shown snippets in the past of workshops that I've done, even in Sydney, and or stuff that I've participated in. But yeah, it's been a really enjoyable part of the channel for sure.
Mm. Did COVID really affect the photography space or photography community in Melbourne or in the other
Yeah,
parts?
yeah, it really did. Like for me as a working photographer, let's say 2019, I was making my living through uh, shooting weddings, events, corporate events, and working a casual job doing photo booth, which was like you take a booth to a corporate event or a wedding, and stuff like that. But then once the lockdown started, and there was this rule about how long you can travel away from home and how many people can be in a room and all those restrictions, everything was off. Weddings, like, were completely restricted down to like five people or whatever. And
Mm.
it went back and forth, and all those corporate meetings that I was shooting, lectures, portraits. And I used to teach also. I was doing media school classes. I was teaching introductory photography stuff at the store that I used to work at Michael's Camera. So everything was cancelled. So not just me, but every photographer and creative, I think, felt the sting, especially here in Melbourne. They were quite strict, and it went on for a good 2 years back and forth. So there was no stability there, knowing how you were going to make ends meet.
Mm.
In the grand scheme of things, we had it pretty lucky. The government did assist with certain things, but that's actually when I got more serious about YouTube, because then I had all this time and I thought, what am I going to sink it into? I'll put it into YouTube, because at that point
Mm.
I'd pretty much taken over the channel myself. My friend Nick had already, from a couple of years prior to that, had to put more of his time into his franchise, into his cafe. So I just took it as an opportunity to put my focus into my own stuff through YouTube, because it was all from home. I could make videos, put them out, and it was still just for the fun of it at that point. It was around then that I think I started to have brands express interest in working together.
Cool.
Yeah.
Awesome. Right. Awesome. Do you believe that these regular meetups, if they are regular, in Melbourne or even other communities across Australia, do you believe it creates a vibrant community in the photography space?
I think it helps. I think it helps to connect and meet people from your common interest in real life, to get out from
Yeah.
behind the phone screen, because we do
Mm.
that enough. We've learnt to do that a lot. Again, during the transformative years of like the lockdowns, everyone started to get used to doing Zoom meetings and working from home, and even the events that I used to photograph for corporate stuff, they got used to just streaming them instead, or shooting them on their iPhones, which were getting
Yeah.
better and better, right? So even now afterwards, there's not as much work in the same stuff I used to do, because they've kind of like just, you know what, we don't need a professional photographer for every single thing as much as we used to.
Mm.
Weddings are still the same. Uh, but yeah, definitely change things. I think like having to get out from behind the screen. So I recognize that after COVID, people were isolating themselves residually, and that it would be good to try and encourage these real life meetups again, get out and regardless of that, I think it's a good thing to network, and you get inspired by what other photographers are doing. And even though for me, like organizing the meetups, I don't always get the chance to interact with everyone as much as I would like. I'm more interested in just facilitating them meeting each other, or getting out from behind the screen at home, and like walking together and taking photos, having a laugh, asking someone else, hey, why do you use that camera or that lens? And yeah, I think it's definitely valuable.
Yeah, well, from the video I watched, everyone seemed quite happy to be there,
Yeah.
and it was definitely a very good time. I wish I lived in Melbourne. I probably would have popped down.
You should sometime.
Yeah, absolutely,
Yeah.
mate. Have you ever thought about potentially doing other meetups in other states, or
Or
I
have you
have,
in the
yeah.
past?
yeah?
Yeah. I just came back from Perth, so we did a little one there. It was about
Okay.
five of us, maybe four or five, I think. And then we went to a film lab in Perth. So it was kind of
Yep.
like two birds, one stone, like getting to visit this cool space and talk to them, and then also meeting like-minded photographers, having a coffee next door, chatting about why we shoot film. And it wasn't as big as, let's say, the Melbourne one, because I didn't have as much time to organize it in advance. I had you know, to catch up with family and do whatever I was doing in Perth. But yeah, I've done stuff in Sydney that was collaborative with a group there called Photographers Anonymous. So, shout out to them. There's, another group that you should check out if you want.
Cool.
And then I don't know if I've done anything else outside of Sydney, Melbourne, and now Perth. But I want to. That's been a plan. I want to come back to Sydney soon, actually, because I get people from there saying, you should come to Sydney. It's so close. And yeah, it is, because Perth is quite far. It's like another country, but Sydney's only an hour or
Yeah.
two flight. Maybe even Adelaide. I don't know. It really depends on how many people, because with Perth, I kind of put the word out. I'm like, hey, anyone from Perth interested in a meetup? However, they don't have as much of a population there, so I didn't get as much, feedback, and that's largely my fault because I could have done more to promote it and done it in
Mm.
advance. But again, I had too much going on, so
Mm.
I thought something's better than nothing. But I know that it's always great to meet new people from different cities and to kind of grow the community. So I definitely want to bring it to more cities.
Yeah, for sure,
Absolutely.
man. Last time you were in Adelaide.
Oh, dude, I haven't been to Adelaide since I was a little kid. I was probably
Fuck,
like,
yeah, right.
yeah, 1989 or something, because my parents are
Oh,
driving
wow.
across. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, fair bit's changed.
I know. I heard it's still
Yeah,
like a, really chill, like close-knit community. Because at
it
Perth,
is.
actually, there was a guy who came
Adelaide,
down from Adelaide to Perth, not
right.
for the meetup. He was there to visit friends, but he'd driven from Adelaide, and he was saying how, yeah, it's still just like Rundle, and it's like just really, it's not
Mm.
even like Perth. It still feels like a more of a sleepy town than Perth does. So I like that. I like visiting places that feel different.
Adelaide is like a massive fish
Big bulb.
bubble. You're gonna bump into someone that knows someone that knows someone that knows you, and it's
Yeah, kind
all
of like
like
Canberra,
that.
right?
Yeah, yeah. Canberra's a little bit like that as well.
Maybe in between Canberra and Perth. And I love beachy cities and towns as well. And
Mm.
I would love to visit Adelaide as an adult. It'd be good.
Yeah. Well, hopefully you get down here soon.
So, has your YouTube channel inspired younger creators out there to do more street photography or really any type of photography? And have you seen any examples of this?
I think it has in a small way.
Yeah.
Maybe not as much as, let's say, someone from a younger age group making YouTube videos about street photography would probably be more relatable to that demographic.
Mm.
But I
Mm.
still have had interactions, let's say, whether it's a comment on a video saying, this is really cool. It inspired me to try street photography. And sometimes I get a lot of private messages on Instagram, and they, as far as I can tell, they're much younger than I am. And they're like, how do I do this? Or I saw your video and I want to do the same. Or it could be a video where I used a little digital point and shoot, even like a really retro 2011 point and shoot camera that has a bit of an old school look. And it's the same thing. I'll get younger crew messaging and saying, how'd you do that? What presets did you use? And like, I want to try street. And how do you not get scared of taking photos of people and stuff like that? Or even when I go out and shoot, I'll have chats on the street with up and coming street photographers who I can tell might be in their early 20s. They're just getting into it. And I don't think I, necessarily inspired many, but it could have been like in combination with other people they watch or interact with. But it would be good, I've always hoped to get like a younger voice, or just to diversify the voice on the channel, whether I have like guest hosts or other people that are different than me, because I want
Yeah.
to be able to broaden that relatability to different
Mm.
viewers. Yeah.
Yeah. It's amazing. It's amazing to see that, I guess, community on YouTube that has helped inspire uh, a small demographic of young people to go out and shoot street photography.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many. YouTube's just great like that, Like, I don't know about
Mm.
you guys, but that's where I reach to when I want to find information about something or look up
Mm.
how do
Yeah.
I or who's who. And then there's like, even in Australia now, even though back when I started it there weren't many, there's some great Aussie creators. I don't know if you guys have seen Lucy Lumen, based over in, I
Yeah, I
think,
have.
Queensland, Sunshine Coast,
Yep.
and
Yep.
then Cooper over in Perth, who I was just hanging out with. And there's a bunch of others like that I wouldn't be able to list now because there's so many. They have like little personal vlogs type channels, especially here in Melbourne and Sydney. And I think it just kind of adds to this community that keeps growing. And that
Yeah.
actually
Yeah,
fuels the continuation of film because they realize like there's
it
the
does.
demand grows and all that. Yeah.
Mm.
It does.
Yeah. Well, that kind of answers the next question. Yeah. Do you see YouTube as an educational platform for
Which
young
it,
people?
yeah,
Which it does.
which
Yeah,
it does. Yeah.
undeniable, undeniable. Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. And it's funny, like
Yeah.
people probably go there, how do I fix my toilet or whatever? They're gonna go on YouTube. They don't.
That's right.
I used to go to the
No, my
library,
yeah, my Gmail notifications are fucking up at the moment, and I literally went to YouTube yesterday to try and fix it. I still haven't fixed it. I've got to get onto that. But that's the thing. You go to sort of find out these little things or anything to do with photography when I was starting. out when I was just taking a deep dive. I don't know if you know Peter McKinnon, probably not
Yeah,
personally,
of
but you know
course.
his
Yeah.
channel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like just little things like that, just watching videos on little things that he's doing and showing people. It's an education. And I
Yeah.
feel like that's what Pushing Film is doing as well with your channel.
Yeah, like even though the name is kind of corny, we were trying to brainstorm a name for the
It's not
channel.
corny at all. I love
Yeah.
it.
It's like,
I love you.
double entendre or whatever, it's like we're pushing, film photography out onto people. Because the funny thing is we had a bunch of other names and they're all taken. We're like, all right, this works. Let's just go with it. And speaking of Peter McKinnon, he started shooting film now too. And he's a
Yeah,
very
yeah, yeah.
educational type creator.
Mm,
But even though he's that mainstream, he's gotten into film. And it was kind of inevitable that at some point, like even these guys who are really deep into digital, they're gonna get a little bit bored or want to try like
yeah,
something different. And digital can only get so different that it's not enough. So it's really great to see. And that to me is proof that film is still thriving and that it will for a while.
Absolutely.
beautiful, mate. Well, you've been a great guest. We'll come to our final question. Thanks for coming on, and it's been an absolute privilege. I hope you've enjoyed yourself in a way.
Oh, for sure, man. My pleasure. I love
Mm.
doing stuff like this. Like, if anything, I just feel a bit like shy or whatever coming into it, knowing, well, what am I going to say? But then it's always easy once I start it, and it's
Yeah.
probably
Yeah.
easier. I guess I don't know what's easier. Have you guys been interviewed, or have you always been the interviewer? Is it just as
Um,
hard either way?
I've been interviewed on stage before.
Yeah.
I was nervous, shitting bricks. But once I'm up there, I'm fine. But I like being the interviewer. I like being able to pick at people's brains and being able
Mm,
to get information. That's why I think podcasting for me is such a great space to be able to do that. Like anyone can sort of start up their own video podcast or audio podcast, whatever. Because we started out as an audio podcast, we didn't want to show our faces at
Yeah.
all, and then
yeah.
all of a sudden we had an interest that we an interest from someone that wanted to be a guest on, and I thought, well, we've only got to do this via video, and then we just started doing more video. So you get more comfortable with it as you do more interviews. Like we've done heaps of interviews, quite a few interviews this year compared to last year, and I find we're getting better and better as we do it.
Yeah.
So
What are your plans? Like, I'm curious. I'll definitely be sharing this and try and like do my best to get
mm.
the word out because I enjoy what you guys are doing. But are you going to keep this happening and get it to a certain point or are you just enjoying the journey?
I'm enjoying the
Yeah.
journey at the moment, but we'd love to build a bit more of an audience and potentially interview more people, get more guests on, and
Mm.
really
Because it's
dive
it's an
into
interesting
stuff.
question, right? Like people would ask
Mm.
me that same thing. They're like, "Hey, would you ever do YouTube full time, or are you planning on?" And I would always say, "I don't
Mm,
know. It depends. If it gets to the point where it seems viable and then uh, enjoyable, which it always has been, I would
yeah,
definitely consider it because sure, I'd love to just do this full time. But
yeah.
I think
I, mm,
podcasts are huge. Podcasts and YouTube are really growing, and it's good to see, especially fellow Aussies starting stuff up and keeping at it because that first few, people burn out. They do a few and they drop
Yeah.
off. But if you guys
yeah.
make it past that first 10 or 20 episodes, you're going
Oh,
a
we're
roll.
about 30 now,
Yeah,
man.
yeah. So you're in. You're deep in. No,
Mm,
it's great to see.
no, for sure, man. So, what advice would you give to your younger self, that younger Hashem who was a bit serious at uni? What what
Well,
what would you say to that person?
uh, I don't regret anything in that sense of like thinking, oh, I should have done everything completely different because it shaped
Mm,
who I am. But if
yeah.
anything, in this world of film and creativity and photography, I kind of just would have wished I had done more from an earlier stage because I've been a bit of a late bloomer in a lot of senses, including my photography. I didn't really get into it till later. Whereas I remember hearing from people who did darkroom classes at high school even, and I just kind of
Oh,
didn't think of
nice.
that. I maybe did woodwork or some other automotive stuff that I was interested in. But
Yeah.
it would have been cool to have taken it up a little bit earlier because maybe I would have reached those milestones a lot earlier. In hindsight, it doesn't really matter because I'm here now. But I was always kind of envious somewhat of those who, because I enjoy film so much that I was like, man, why didn't I do this earlier? Have you ever had that where you're like, why didn't I,
Yeah, for
discover this
sure, mate.
earlier? Yeah. So
I've
that's
been
all really.
itching.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd been itching to start a podcast since I reckon I was 17,
No way.
and I didn't start till I was 21. So
Exactly. And then when you wait
it's a
and you're
very
like,
long time.
wow, there was nothing stopping me from this, just doing this
I
earlier.
know. That's right. That's right. Yeah. So that's one thing I wish I'd started earlier. But it is what it is. Life is a journey, and
Yeah.
everything happens for a reason. I truly believe that.
And
Even
in the
me.
grand scheme of things, you guys are still started pretty early, you know. People think like, oh, podcasting is dead. There's no point starting now. It can't be further from the truth. I think we're
That's
right
right.
in the prime of it.
Yeah.
TV's going to keep going by the wayside. People are
Yeah.
continuing to prefer podcasts and like
Mm.
this kind of free media, like independent media.
Yeah. Modern media is now sort of starting to become a trend with podcasting and things of that nature. So it's like what did I watch or listen to the other day on the plane? Do you know Collins and Samir, that podcast or
No.
no? So they were talking about how the modern media sort of influenced the recent presidential election in America
Hmm.
because
Yeah.
Trump went on a heap of podcasts and got like over,
Yeah.
I don't know.
Millions of views. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks,
No, people
Millie.
are
Didn't
starting to
really do.
prefer it. No, because
Yeah.
like it just feels more real, It's not as filtered, and it's just conversations like this, in a mainstream media presentation, it would be so curated and planned, and you don't know what to believe. Whereas when
Yeah.
you just see people chatting like this, it just feels like you're in the room. It's a real
Yeah.
conversation, and I think people appreciate authenticity. So,
They absolutely do, mate,
yeah.
for sure. Thanks for coming on, Hashem. It's
No
been an
worries,
absolute
guys.
Appreciate it.
pleasure.
Hey, man, it'll be pleasure to come on sometime down the track. I hope to see this is, continuing to grow and then get in touch. If it's a year or two or whatever, we'll do it again.
Yeah.
For sure, man. Thanks for coming on.
All right, guys.
Keep
Take
doing
care,
what you're
mate.
doing.
Keep doing what you're
Thank
doing.
you.
Thank you. Take care. What a great conversation with Hashem. Hopefully, he can come back to Adelaide at some point. We'd love to have you down here, mate. If you want to learn more about Hashem McAdam and his work, a link to his Instagram will be in the description and a link to his website. If you want to learn more about pushing film, we'll have his YouTube channel in the description below, and I believe he has an Instagram account around it as well, so we'll link that as well. If you want to learn more about Twin Times, Charlie and I's Instagrams will be in the description below. And other than that, I think that's about it. This has been the Twin Times podcast. If you're on Spotify, please give us a rating out of 5 stars and a follow. And if you're on YouTube, like and subscribe. It really helps us out. Other than that, we wish you nothing but peace and love throughout the rest of the week. And we'll see you in the next episode. See you later.